Welcome to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credens. No one knows us better or loves us more than our mothers. In this hour, we focus on the relationship between mother and daughter, the adult daughter. Few relationships are as complicated. It's where love and anger can live side by side. It's where the lifelong push and pull tension of the parent and the child plays out in the adult-to-adult world. It can be the best of friendships, and it can become fraught with misunderstandings, but always, always the bond is there, for better or for worse. It's up to us to make what we will of it. 3 guests join our exploration of the mother-adult-daughter relationship. First, I'd like to welcome Iris Krasnow. She's the author of the 2006 book, I Am My Mother's Daughter. She also wrote the New York Times bestseller, Surrendering to Marriage, as well as Surrendering to Motherhood and Surrendering to Yourself. A longtime journalism professor at American University, her writing's been featured in many publications, and she's appeared on numerous national radio and television programs. I'm pleased that she's adding ours to that list. She joins us from her home this hour in Annapolis, Maryland. Iris Krasnow, welcome to our show. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Here in our studio, Dr. Celeste Schaller is assistant professor in the School of Nursing at the University of Louisville, and her research involves the impact of the mother-daughter relationship on health and well-being. And Dr. Schaller, welcome to you. Hello.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Eli Karam is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an assistant professor in the family therapy program in the Kent School of Social Work at U of L. He also maintains a private practice here in Louisville. Hello to you, Dr. Karam.
Nice to be here.
The number to join our conversation this hour is 814-TALK. That's 814-8255. Or toll-free 877-814-TALK. You can also send an email to soa@wfpl.org or on Twitter at SOATalk. And Iris, I would like to start with you. I had given the title of your most recent book, I Am My Mother's Daughter. The subtitle is Making Peace with Mom Before It's Too Late. So I'd like to start with you and this essential message of peacemaking. Why was this important enough to write about and to interview dozens of other daughters about their mothers? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Thank you. First of all, I want to just go back to something you said, that no one loves you like your mother loves you. And one of the things that I found out by being a daughter and by interviewing all these women is that no one loves you like your mother loves you, even when it doesn't feel like love. I Am My Mother's Daughter, Making Peace with Mom Before It's Too Late, was spawned by 2 things. One is I tend to write my heart, and the good news is, many other baby boom women are going through the same passages of generational angst that I hit upon, from surrendering to motherhood, surrendering to marriage, surrendering to yourself, to this new passage, unprecedented passage in the female growth cycle, when midlife women get to grow old with their mothers. When Nancy Friday wrote her bestseller in 1979, My Mother, Myself, the average life expectancy for women was in their, I think it was 78. Right now, women in their 90s are the fastest growing segment of the aging population. So whether we love them or loathe them, at age 50, we might have our mothers showing up for Easter dinner for the next 30 years. So aside from that demographic, my own life was that my aging, difficult, formidable, wonderful Holocaust survivor mother was dying. It took her a long time to die. She died over a period of 3 years. But I realized that very profoundly, that you couldn't say things like, I'm sorry, or Mom, explain this, at a funeral. So this very personal journey, which is a universal journey of losing your mother at 51 or 53 or 48, which is when women are losing their mothers more frequently these days, even 60, was an issue that was prevalent on many women's minds. And so I remember I was walking with somebody in my hometown of Annapolis, Maryland, and she said to me, Iris, oh gosh, my mother just had open heart surgery, and she's never met my daughter, and I've been so mad at her for all these years, and I'm going to go see her. I think I'm going to go see her. It's going to be hard. And I just said, you can't say you're sorry at a funeral. And that the power of those words from my own, just hearing them out of my own mouth and seeing her expression made me realize that I needed to write about this. And the mirroring between a mother and a daughter, and I'd love to hear our experts, is just so profound. I also want to just add, I'm the mother of 4 teenage sons. I do not have daughters.
Good luck to you, Iris.
I have no daughters.
Wait, that's ironic, isn't it? But the other, before we go to our guests here in the studio, the other important message that I find in your book is that it's not just about making peace with your mom so that you don't have post-funeral regrets and this incomplete relationship, but it's so much tied to whether we like it or not. We had better make peace if we want to have peace within ourselves throughout, if mom is with us for 20, 30 years yet.
Well, I love that you picked up on that. And I'm going to just say the most resounding truth to me is I interviewed 118 adult daughters from Maine to Berkeley, California, and they were 32 to 70, and they were rich and they were poor and they were gay and they were straight and they were Jewish and they were born again and they were white and they were black. And they all had very different stories, but there was one unifying truth about all these women. And what they told me in countless ways was whether they loved their mothers or loathed their mothers, whether they loved having dinner with them or whether they couldn't stand being in the same room with them. Ultimately, the mother-daughter relationship has turned out to be the most important relationship in their lives in this way. That mother-daughter angst, love or loathe, has turned out to dramatically, primarily affect the way they work, the way they play, the way they marry, the way they mother their own brood, and most importantly, the way they feel about themselves. The mirror of self-esteem comes from that mirror of mother-daughter, and I know it's really been true for me.
And Dr. Karam, I want you to chime in at this point, too, on the powerful nature of this particular relationship. I know that people will be listening saying, well, I'm close to my dad, too, but it's this particular relationship we're looking at, and as Iris has said, becomes the framework for our lives and why it is important. And this is not about, and Iris, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's not about, everything has to be happy and rosy. It's about the idea of making peace and making resolutions about a relationship. Dr. Karam?
Exactly. I think there's no more kind of important relationship between a mother and a daughter. And in my work, I see, in my private practice, I see several types of mother-daughter issues presenting. Sometimes an individual adult child will come in to complain about or to talk about the burden of taking care of their mother or transitioning into this next kind of role. And sometimes the couple will come in where the mother is really has a close relationship, or what we call enmeshed with the daughter, and it impacts the marriage. Or sometimes I'm working with a teenager in the context of the family, and these patterns where the adult child has said, well, I will never parent like this, or I won't do what my mother does, but here these patterns have crept in again and they're doing the same thing. So I really view this kind of prime relationship from multiple angles, and have got to, even though, clearly there are similarities between fathers and sons and mothers and daughters, I do think there is something special about this relationship. Something
primal. Dr. Celeste Schaller, and we'll talk about your studies throughout, but your research is very much about this essential relationship and the effect on our physical health and well-being. What kinds of things do you hear when interviewing subjects in your studies? Does this all sound familiar to you?
Yes, and I started with this looking at the demographics. I've worked with families in crisis, and I wanted to narrow that down a bit. And when you look at the demographics, older women are primarily our older population. And when you look at who takes care of them during health transitions, it's usually a woman, and it's usually an adult daughter. So I narrowed my focus for my studies with that particular dyad. And there are many other combinations, but this has been very interesting. And even when studies say they're studying the family, it's still often mothers and daughters when you dissect their sample. I found a lot of interesting things, and one of them is you mentioned about the role reversal, and some of the women in my first study was older women who had a hip fracture and their daughter, and I interview the mothers and the daughters in my research. I keep that dyad, and it's the first study was interviewing the mothers and daughters separately, and then I interviewed them together. But it was very interesting. One of them, or lots of them, would say, it's kind of that old role reversal, but it's really not. And I've termed that evolving matriarchs, so that they're shifting and changing, and there's transitions in their lives, and they look at the values in their lives and how do they transmit those from one generation to the next. And some of those are very concrete in terms of food, in terms of certain ceremonies. So the mothers will begin to transition and give some of those responsibilities to their adult daughter. So I like that change. It's not really role reversal, but evolving matriarchs. So we might see what that brings up in discussion.
What do you think? I love that phrase, too, when I read through some of your work, Dr. Schaller. What do you think, Iris? Evolving matriarchs, the evolution of matriarchs.
Yeah, I love that, too. And okay, here's what I think is a 53-year-old woman who just lost her mother and, am surrounded by boxes right now. I just unloaded her apartment, and I'm smelling her Shalimar on her clothing and taking out her nicked pots and pans that I remember from all of my girlhood, and looking at a painting that was hanging over their bed. And I think that a daughter never stops needing more from her mother. I think that even when she was at her sickest of sick, I never felt like her mother. I never mothered my mother. My mother was my mother. And but to take the evolving matriarch, her ceremonies, even her scent. I mean, I now wear Shalimar. How spooky is that? It was a passage of woman to woman that's biblical. It's this chain of women from Naomi to Ruth to Rachel to Rebecca who just pass on the essential tools of womanhood, which is how to live and how to give and ultimately how to love. So what I think, and I speak to women's groups all over the country about, going from daughter to newlywed to new mother to midlife daughter grieving for her mother, I think there's a yearning in all of us, and in men, too. I have these 4 sons. We yearn to be mothered, and when that force, that mother force, that love force, that grounding force is gone, it's a profound emptiness that doesn't necessarily have to lead to depression, although I'm sure some of my therapists on the show with me today can say they see it, but it's a hole that is never again filled by the same energy.
It's interesting you say that, and interesting too to sort of clarify when we always say role reversal, and when you say, I never mothered my mother. There, no matter how frail, how old,
never,
how sick, there's always something a daughter needs from her mother. And I have heard from women who have lost their mother, who've lost both parents, who no matter how old they are, they will say, I feel like an orphan. It's not like, and they're independent women able to take care of themselves, but there is just that essential piece. And Dr. Karam, I know you hear this from your clients too, as Iris is saying, a hole that can never be filled.
No one loves you in that same way.
No one does. And it sounds like, Iris had a great, profound relationship with her mother. I think sometimes it's more difficult when there has been tension in a relationship and either a adult child loses their mother or has to go into this caretaking role, but they don't have that good history to draw from, yet they're all they have.
Well, we had a normal history. We had chafes, bumps, grinds, all-out warfare, but I loved her profoundly. So it wasn't a mommy dearest, is what you're saying. That can be hard when you were at total odds and then they die and then you can't say you're sorry. You can't make amends. You can't make peace.
Right. And I will see a lot of my clients come in at these transition points around their adult other siblings are getting married. There is parenting issues where a lot of these things are tweaked, if you will, where mom has input, and sometimes the daughter goes along with it. Sometimes it's not a good fit for how they're living their life. And I think that the skill is to take things from that relationship, that prime relationship that you enjoy, but also to know, what you want to modify and why you're modifying it. Because a lot of adults that I work with, they say, well, I don't want to do what my mom did. But they haven't really explored why or what keeps them stuck or how they even get into those same patterns. So, it's great when it works out, but it's also, I think, equally beneficial to learn from what didn't work. So, you do not make those same mistakes or follow those same patterns with your own children.
And yet,
I always say you can take the best of your mother and leave the worst behind and become, a formidable blend of these two strong women.
Yeah.
If your mother was a cuddler, then, or an over-cuddler, you might not be that, slothery with your kids. My mother was steely, and she wasn't a big hugger. And, I find myself overcompensating by being the last person to kiss everyone goodnight maybe 12 times. It's a little much for the kids.
Let's take a quick break, and I would want to ask at this point, what is your mother-daughter story? Have there been struggles in your relationship, and what have you learned from each other? Join the conversation, 814-TALK, 814-8255, or toll-free, 877-814-TALK, or send an email to soa@wfpl.org, or reach us on Twitter at SOA Talk. You're listening to State of Affairs on WFPL. Welcome back to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credens. We're talking this hour about the mother-daughter relationship, the dynamics and ever-changing nature of that female bond. And what is your story? What do you see as the most significant moments, for better or for worse, in your relationship with your mother or your daughter? Our guests are Celeste Schaller. She's assistant professor in the School of Nursing at U of L. Eli Karam, assistant professor in the Family Therapy Program in the Kent School of Social Work at U of L. And journalist and author Iris Krasnow. Her 2006 book is I Am My Mother's Daughter. It's your opportunity to join us with questions or comments at 814-TALK, 814-8255. I want to stay on this issue of, Iris, you say the mirrors are everywhere. We've talked about, women who will say, I'm scolding the kids and I hear my mother, or I swear I would never do this or that, and there I am doing just what mom used to do that would make me crazy. And we greet these moments with mixed emotions. And as you said, Iris, you can go one of two ways, right? You can stay in those patterns, or you fall into those patterns that perhaps you disliked, or you go overboard sort of in the other direction. What I want to ask Dr. Karam too. Let's go back. I mean, our focus is on adult daughters and their mothers, but what are the lasting effects then of a mother's actions and words on the kind of relationship that they're going to have with each other when the daughter is grown?
Right. I think it's never too early to start to establish a way to a mother and a daughter. I'm thinking it kind of pre-adolescent, teenage years to start talking between mothers and daughters, kind of the talk. And a lot of daughters won't do that because in some ways, they don't have a model for it, or they idealize their mom, or what if I talk to mom and she doesn't understand, or I don't want to offend her. So they look up to their moms. And they like to, in this notion of mirroring, fit into how mom views them. But if they do something a little different outside the box, they, maybe they're not telling their mom that, or they're not being authentic about that. So if moms early on can kind of establish that their daughters can come to them, even with things that might not fit how their mom views them or might surprise them, if they can have this talk, this kind of what's up, doc question, the state of the union of the mother and daughter early on, I think that makes it easier to do throughout the life cycle into adulthood, so that there's not these big gaping kind of wounds or unexpressed emotions or sediments later on in the relationship. So I don't think it's ever too early to do that.
Dr. Schaller.
One of the things that I found with the women that I've interviewed is in a concept I've called internalizing female lineage. And not only is it mother-daughter, but it might be mother-aunts or mother and her sisters or her grandmothers. So a whole female lineage before and after. So who are your ancestors? Who will be your descendants? Who are these women? What are their gifts? What are their things that you don't want to do, so that you really look at a broader perspective of who I am as a woman and how do I fit now in the context of this family before and after my time. And I think that's a really healthy way. And one of the things I did in one of the studies was have the mother-daughters bring a picture or bring pictures of events together. And that was very interesting. They had pictures of grandmothers, aunts, and so they began to talk about all the women in their life. And that sometimes I think takes a little bit of the pressure off of this mother-daughter dyad and some of what we socially think of the mother-daughter and some of those conflicts that come up that may not be there in reality. But when you look at a bigger picture of who I am as a woman and where does that come from, that's very interesting. It's very helpful, I think, to see patterns.
In family therapy, we accomplish that by what's called a genogram. The family comes in, or the mother and daughter, and we literally, it looks like a family tree, but it gives us much more information than demographic things. It tells us about the quality of the relationships throughout the generations. So we can tell if there were hostile mother-daughter relationships, too close relationships, kind of rigid boundaries, or enmeshed. So we can tell a lot about the quality of relationships, not only in kind of the current generation, but throughout the generation. Going back, 3, 4, 5 generations.
One of the great gifts of women living longer than ever and women in their 50s getting to have a mother for a long time is if you understand your mother's history, it may melt your heart. And I know just personally in my own life, my mother was the sole surviving family member in the Holocaust, and she didn't tell me her raw stories until I was in my 40s. And as an adolescent, I thought, she's so tough and she's so steely, and if you had 103 fever, you went to school, and you rebel against this toughness. And in my 40s, when I started to understand her history, how she was mothered, which she wasn't mothered because she lost her mother, it really does melt your heart, and you get to have a new relationship built on truth, built on raw pain, built on acceptance, and built on maturity that you didn't get to have even 30 years ago when women died 10 years earlier. So it's really, really a healing gift that women and that we're all living longer than ever, because it gives you this extended passage for forgiveness. And if you can't forgive, you can at least understand some of the behaviors that may have repelled you. So to me, that's the beauty. And when I talk about my book, and I always get emails, in fact, I'd love to hear from any of your listeners, where people have very, very, very wrenching mother stories where, I thought my mother was so cold, and then I only was 50 and when I found out that her own mother either hit her a lot or was vacant or was never told me I loved you. And I know all our guests today have heard that over and over from women who say, my mother never told me she loved me. Can you imagine that? Growing up without the word love in at least one of your daily dialogues with your mother. I could not imagine that.
It is essential information, isn't it, to understand what shaped your mother. And it's not something that as children we think about. As children, throughout our lives, there's a degree of us that we're the child, we should come first. I mean, we don't necessarily lose that, but to try to understand that she's doing the best she could with what she was given, whatever that might have been. Dr. Schaller? There
was another idea that came about with the interviews with the women and the mothers and daughters, and I've called it mastering maturity. And as you both master maturity, because you're simultaneously growing older, so the mother is going through transitions as well, so it can be just as difficult for the mother's growth and development as it is the daughter. So the mother may be 90, but she's still going through transitions that are new to her. So when you think of both generations or multiple generations, ultimately mastering maturity.
That's easy to forget, isn't it? Because we want mom to stay mom.
Yep.
And we don't acknowledge that. And Dr. Karam, it's it's a lifelong, isn't it, of reevaluating, renegotiating, redefining
Yeah.
as we go through transitions, both of us,
Yes.
mother and daughter.
I think that's an excellent point, that it's not just one person going through the transition, and it's a transition of the relationship. And many times, too, it's very difficult. These transitions, a lot of times with aging parents, involve declines in physical health. And I think it's very tough for the adult daughter to see their mother in some way limited, either physically or in some cases, which has been very heart-wrenching for me to work with, whereas the adult daughter has looked up to their mother, and now they're in some kind of mental decline. So they're not there in the same way, which really is a shot to the system, yes, in a lot of ways. And how do you grieve that? We talked about grieving once your parent is gone, but what if your mother is still here, but in some ways she's not your mother? And I deal with a lot of that. And as we were saying earlier, it's not about problem solving. A lot of these events happened in the past or in your family that you can't change. It's really about forgiveness and acceptance, and in a lot of these repair work and therapy and repairing the mother-daughter bond.
And, just from something you said, which just really struck me, in the end, how you accept, forgive, forget, it's very selfish, because what you get to do when you heal your own heart is to have a normal life. I mean, when you hold on to childhood blame and vintage rage and all that horrible anger, it's just poisoning your own soul. It's not getting back at your mother. It's so emancipating to just let go of it and to move on, because then you get to have a normal life. I always tell people, they say, oh, it's so great that, you move through all these things with your mother. And I say it's very selfish, really, because by doing that and by hearing about her own war stories, literal war stories, and understanding that she was maybe colder and stricter than many people because of her past, it lets me be free. It lets me be unburdened. And it lets us, just open our hearts.
You're listening to State of Affairs. We're using this hour to examine the relationship between mothers and their adult daughters. We'd love to hear your experiences, maybe some of your struggles, some of your successes. What have you learned from each other through the years? 814-TALK, 814-8255. And let's talk first with Sophia. Hello, Sophia. Welcome to the show.
Hi, I have just a couple of comments. I have actually a lot, because everything you said I've gone through with my mother pretty much. But the older I get, of course, the wiser my mom gets, and she was right about most everything. And our tumultuous relationship has just really enhanced my life so much, with my child rearing, with my marriage, just everything. I know that if we had a less tumultuous relationship, I don't think that I would have all the wisdom that I call upon to raise my family and nurture my kids. I am like my mom completely. I love too much and too hard and too often. But I wanted to say, too, my mom is right now in a mental decline, and before, like 2 years before this, we just exercised everything about our past together, and she revealed something to me that just blew me away. She said that she always looked up to me and my strength and wished that she were more of a go-getter like me, and it just blew me away. And it's true. Knowing their past does melt your heart, because for my mom to have been able to love us so fully and completely and unabashedly, to have not had a mom to love her, I always wondered, where did she get that love from? Where did she get all that wisdom and stuff she gave us? She didn't have a formal education or anything. It was just from a desire to love these kids in a way in which she never was loved. But I just can never figure that out. How do you get that from not having a mother or a father to love you like that? It's just amazing to me.
What great comments, Sophia, and how moving, the surprises we find, Iris, and she said, I never knew. My mother looked up to me. Here as little girls, as women who are growing up, we look to our mothers to model what we should be, and we look up to our moms, and it is astonishing to think, wow, she thinks the same of me.
What I love about this comment, and I have to admit I'm a little envious, because daughters, just by nature of being, a little more emotional traditionally and a little more open conversationally, say stuff to their moms, and, there's more of a sharing. As I said earlier, I have 4 teenage sons and 1 husband and 2 male cats, and it's a little lonely here in the top. People are not as fawning and open, and if I'm openly sharing things, the boys, they internalize it, but it isn't as revelatory. And so I think that there's something magical, special, sometimes horrific, between a mother and a daughter that really does not exist between a mom and her sons.
Sophia, thank you for wise comments. And let's go next to Murray, who calls us from Chicago. Hello, Murray.
Hi. I have a question about one of these transitions that that you're discussing here. Involves two of my friends, a couple of sisters, and again, they're going through this kind of transition stage with their mother. And one of the daughters in particular is more active, on a daily basis, I think, financially providing for the mother in a lot of ways, although both of these girls definitely love their mother. And I think in the past, the other sister has used either her financial position or the fact that, she is a mother and is married, whereas the sister who is, financially providing for the mother is not. She's used these sorts of things as reasons to not be as involved with the mother. And I think, probably both the mother and her sister would be very eager for her to take a more active role, not talking about, the financial side of that, but certainly providing time or helping her with things around the house that she's, physically not able to do anymore. I was wondering if you have any observations from cases like this, or maybe any suggestions for the daughters.
Well, you bring up an interesting subject, and I'll throw it around to our guests before we go to break, and that is, we've been talking mother-daughter, but it's mother-daughters often. Is that dynamic? Dr. Schaller, do you have some words from her?
The literature shows that caregiving typically will go to one person, so there may be multiple siblings in the family, and that can come about in a variety of ways. It can come because that person's the oldest, or it can come because they're a nurse, or it can come because they're the oldest daughter, or maybe they have the most money or the most freedom from work, etc. But usually there's one that's sort of the key person, and that's been very interesting, I think, in research to see how one person sort of rises to the top. And there may be relief, there may be other people who help that person, but there's sort of one key person, and there's a lot of study about how that evolves. So
how can that relationship where you have, let's say, the one daughter is more the primary caregiver, if that that's. How does that affect the mother's relationship with the other daughter, and vice versa? What issues can arise there?
I think it affects the whole family the whole family system, because those siblings have to have some understanding of how we're going to take care of mom, and if they can't get on the same page, it causes hurt feelings, between the siblings, between the mom and the siblings, and often triangulates the mom into something. She wants her daughters to get along, but if they're her children to get along, but if they can't, it makes things difficult for the whole system. And those would be the type of people that I'd like to see in my office.
Does it sometimes become a label, Iris? Do you think of daughters saying, "Well, who loves mom more?"
Oh, this is so great, this conversation. It's an ancient conversation, and there's more questions than answers. But all I can tell you is that everybody loves their mother in a different way. And whereas my sister, who's a really brilliant attorney, had a more methodical, brilliant, way of dealing with my mom, and really did wonderfully at it, in terms of even her counting. What I gave my mother was maybe more of an earthy adventure injection. And I think we both understood what our strengths were in terms of what we gave my mother. And then she had one son, and mothers might love their daughters, but they worshiped their son. And so he was the second coming, and so he just needed to show up, and that gave her this injection of love and life. So I hear this and heard it and lived it. And I think the best thing siblings can do is recognize what they're good at. Someone might be good at estate planning. I was good at taking my mother. In the end, she lost part of one of her legs. And I was good at taking her on wheelchair adventures or having her to my riverfront house in Annapolis, Maryland, and just talking to her and making her laugh and making her a martini. So it's a very, very hard thing. I mean, the best thing siblings can do is to realize, especially if a parent's on the last lap of their lives is to just be nice to each other. You know, don't act like scrappy, fighting adolescents, maybe even if you did that in your earlier years. Just, you know, make it easy on mom. Make peace.
We have to take another short break. When we come back, more on mothers and grown daughters. You're invited to join us with your stories, lessons learned, the gifts you received in this relationship, in your own mother-daughter relationship. Join us at 814-TALK, 814-8255, or toll-free 877-814-TALK. You are listening to State of Affairs on WFPL. Welcome back to State of Affairs. I'm Julie Credence. Here are some headlines from the WFPL newsroom. Union workers at GE's Appliance Park are voting today on proposed contract changes, including a wage freeze. University of Louisville officials are announcing a federal grant to help Kentuckians better prepare for a pandemic. And the Army Corps of Engineers is holding a ceremony this hour marking the completion of the $400 million McAlpin Locks replacement project. More on those stories coming up later today on WFPL. Right now, though, our conversation on the mother-daughter relationship continues with Eli Karam, assistant professor in the family therapy program in the Kent School of Social Work at the University of Louisville. Journalist and author Iris Krasnow, her 2000 book is I Am My Mother's Daughter. And Dr. Celeste Schaller, assistant professor in the School of Nursing at U of L. We'll be going back to your calls in just a few minutes. 814-TALK. 814-8255. But before the hour escapes us, and it's going by so quickly, I want to turn to Dr. Schaller and talk more specifically about some of the research and studies you have been doing. We've been talking largely this hour about emotional health, making peace, those benefits, but you look also at physical health and the impact these relationships can have on them.
Yes, I looked at mothers who had a hip fracture in the adult-daughter relationship with the mother, and found a lot of inner strength. The mothers described that they had, and it's different than hardiness or resilience. It was deeper within. And I saw the quality of the relationship change over time, and especially as the mother aged and the mother got ill. Even if they were estranged for 30 years, they would come together toward the end if the mother was ill. So what I'm doing recently now with the National Institute of Health funded study is examining that concept of inner strength on mothers and daughters, looking at the quality of the mother-daughter relationship. And the population that I'm looking at is the older women have hypertension, have high blood pressure, and the daughters may or may not have high blood pressure, but surprisingly, about 2/3 so far in my study of the daughters have high blood pressure. So it's just very preliminary, and I've looked at some initial findings because we're still collecting data. But I think it's important to look at what is the quality of this relationship and how does that affect their physical health. So I hope to see how will that affect their self-management of high blood pressure, and how does that affect their quality of health-related life. Just a preliminary findings, which is very interesting. A subscale measured the physical health of the mothers and daughters, and of course it was very different. But their vitality index was very similar. So I thought that was interesting, that mothers were not as physically able as their daughters, yet both of their scores were high on vitality, and that was full of pep, full of energy. So that was interesting. So I'm hoping to see the quality of the relationship and how that will affect their quality of their health. So,
well, other reasons, Iris Krasnow, for making peace now and not waiting. If there's some way to salvage, to repair a relationship that needs repairing, it has a very real effect on our physical health as well.
Well, you know, there's nothing like carrying around anger and grief in your belly. You know, I'm not a shrink and I'm not a doctor. I'm a daughter and a reporter who's asked hundreds of women and people hundreds of nosy and embarrassing questions. And the truth is, when you're mad at someone or you feel hate and loathing and poison in your gut, that's not good for you. So I always tell people, you know, who tell me and write me, and I'd love your listeners to write me at iriskrasnow.com, 2 words, 1 word. You know, and they say, oh, I can't forgive my mother, you know, she hated my boyfriend and then he left me, or I can't forgive my mother, I never had a cookie in my life, or my mother. I always say, if your mother's 81 and ailing, pick up a phone and say you're sorry, even if you're not sorry one bit. I mean, who benefits from carrying this stuff in your belly? I mean, we all know what that feels like. And it's, that old adage, don't go to bed mad. And there's something really eternally healing about that. Just let it go. We're not, thank God, the four of us are on a telephone talking in comfortable situations. My sons are not fighting right now in Baghdad. And it always can be worse. And there's nothing like healing a family relationship, because then you get to go forward in your life when those family members are gone and be a whole WHOLE person who knows you did your damnedest. You did your best.
I really think that's true. I've dealt with so many people that once they can forgive or accept, not only does it improve them, it improves all of their interpersonal relationships, their marriage, their relationship with their children. There is something powerful about being able to forgive, even if you do it for yourself in the beginning. And it really has this systemic, lasting impact and ripple throughout the rest of the interpersonal relationships that you have.
Well, that's the thing, doing it for yourself, because, Iris, did you encounter women whose mothers were not willing to meet them halfway, who were not willing to lay their cards on the table, to either accept blame or responsibility, who didn't feel that they had a problem?
Oh, yeah. I remember one of my wonderful women, I called her Wonder Woman, because she went to her mother, listen, Mom, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and her mother kept saying, well, you can never be sorry enough. And I said to this woman, how do you feel? Do you feel you did your very best? Again, I'm not a shrink. I mean, I'm just been listening. When you interview someone as a journalist, you spend hours with them. I said, do you think you did your best? And she said, yes. And I said, well, then you get to put a smile on your face and go forward, and it's not your problem anymore. Whatever your mom's holding on to has very little to do with you, and I bet it has to do with her own mother.
One of the things that a lot of the mothers and daughters in the dyads in my studies have said, which I think is very, very healing and very helpful, is we're learning, or I'm learning. So, if there's a transition and the mother has been in charge all of her life and she's becoming more frail physically, and she will say, I'm learning to get information from my daughter and then act, or I'm learning. So I think those are good words to reflect on. I'm learning.
It's a process.
Iris, I know that we have to let you go just a little bit early this hour to fulfill a motherly responsibility.
I have to pick up 4 kids at school, other than that.
But just very quickly, I guess my final question to you, and this line from your book just hit me. You wondered, as I think you were at an event, a family, maybe your son's bar mitzvah, your mother was there, and you went to get her a drink or something, and you were wondering, who will I be when she is no longer here? And what a powerful question for all of us to ask. Who will I be when I'm not a daughter anymore? Exactly. Now, you talk in your book how her life shaped you. How has her death shaped you?
Oh gosh, whether our mothers are in this room or in this world or have moved on to the next world, we still hear their voices every day. There's something that happens every day and every minute, and my girlfriends say the same thing. And interestingly, it usually happens in my kitchen when I'm reaching for an ingredient and wondering how much to put in, and thinking of her own cooking and her own wisdom and lack of sometimes. Where your mothers are the power inside of you, whether that's good or bad or ugly. I feel as connected, more connected, eternally connected, not only to who she is, but to who I'm able to become because of that rootedness. And I know one of the guests, and this was just beautifully said, talk about all the relationships of all the women who stood before us. We stand on the shoulders of all the mothers before us. And you can choose, and this is really important and something I've discovered, is you can really fall apart when you lose a parent. I've lost both of mine now. And you can get into great black holes of depression, loneliness, and feel, gosh, I'm an orphan, no one loves me. Or you can use the power of their history mistakes and love and groundedness and really go forward and become a formidable blend of what came before you. And I just choose that hopeful path and not that lamenting past, because you can't really change anything. I mean, this is the circle of life, is that you're born, you live, and you die, and that's just the way it is, and it's very lonely at times.
Iris, it was well said, and it's well written in your book, I Am My Mother's Daughter. We've been talking with journalist and author Iris Krasnow, her 2006 book, I Am My Mother's Daughter. A good read. And Iris, thanks so much for joining us again. Folks can find you at www.iriskrasnow.com.
And thank you for the brilliant insights of your two other guests, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Iris, thanks very much for joining us. I tell you what, let's take one more very quick call before the end of the hour. And Emily, that is you. Just a quick comment or question.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you guys for this program today. I love this. I love State of Affairs. But when I left college, I moved back in with my parents, and so much negative is said about the boomerang generation. But I really loved that experience. My mom was working at the time, and when I didn't have a job, I sort of took over household duties, and so I got to really see what it had been like raising three daughters of her own. But it gave me an opportunity to become friends with my mom, which was something that I would never trade. And I really loved having that opportunity and living there with her, not only for the free rent, but also for the friendship, which we still have. So
That's great.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, Emily, thanks for joining us. To become friends, I mean, that is the goal of so many mothers and adult daughters, and we know it's fraught with missteps along the way, but Dr. Karam, no matter what the relationship is, it's possible to come to terms and at the very best to become best friends.
Yes, I think that's also certainly a predictor in any kind of close relationship, the quality of the friendship. And obviously we have a different relationship with our parent when we are adults than we do when we're kids. Mm-hmm. And that friendship, that is a nice thing. And to come home, the last caller, to come home and then to foster that and to have some respect for what mom was doing or how hard it was, I think that kind of admiration builds friendship. And I do think, as we've been saying along this hour, that there's always a chance, even though you can't go back and redo some of the things from the past, with this acceptance and forgiveness, you can kind of narrate the last chapter of, if you're the parent, your life, or the relationship between the mother-daughter. You can always end it in a different, more positive way. And I think that is the hope, and lets me do what I do, and is a powerful experience to work with these kind of parent relationships. But I really appreciate everything that all the guests have said today.
And just the last 20, 30 seconds to you, Dr. Schaller, in terms of, Emily realizing, who her mother is, what she does, and what Emily's place in that is as well.
I think the push to be independent was so strong for so many years, and then we swing toward dependence, and I think a key is interdependence and really appreciating people in the context of who they are.
Well, we are out of time. It's been a really interesting, lovely program. I thank our callers for sharing their experiences, and certainly our guests, Dr. Celeste Schaller, Assistant Professor in the School of Nursing at the University of Louisville. We look forward to hearing more about your research on this relationship. Dr. Eli Karam, Assistant Professor in the Family Therapy Program in the Kent School of Social Work at U of L. You can reach him at www.elikaram.com. I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And of course, we thank journalist and author Iris Krasnow. Her 2006 book is I Am My Mother's Daughter. She joined us just earlier this hour. For more information about today's program, you can go to WFPL.org, click on State of Affairs. You can email us from there or call us at 502-814-6500. You can follow us on Twitter at SOA Talk. State of Affairs is produced by Louisville Public Media with support from the University of Louisville. Robin Fisher is our producer. Our assistant is Laura Ellis. We had additional assistance today from Brian Kahn. Our interns are Haley Hart and Alexia Williams. And Carol Pye was on the phones today. I'm Julie Credence. I hope you'll join us next time for another edition of State of Affairs.
The views presented on State of Affairs do not necessarily reflect those of the University of Louisville, Louisville Public Media, or its underwriters.